The voicemail came in at 2:17 in the morning. Colt Decker did not know the number. He had not recognized it when the call first rang, through an hour before, and he let it go to the machine the way he let most things go, with a kind of practiced distance that had become less a habit and more a posture over the years. He was sitting at the small kitchen table in his rented room in Billings, Montana, with a cup of coffee going cold beside his hand and a road atlas open to a page he had been staring at for 20 minutes without deciding anything. Coda lay on the linoleum near the door, head on his paws, watching Colt with the unhurried patience of a dog who had learned that his person's stillness was not always calm. Colt pressed play. The voice on the recording was old and dry and slow, the kind of voice that had been shaped by outdoor work and thin winter air. It paused more than it should have. There was a quality to it that Colt placed before the first sentence finished, a quality he associated with men who had held on to things too long and were only now late considering what to put down. "This is Henry Stovall," the voice said. "I got your number from Dale Merritt. Who got it from somebody in the service? I'm sorry to bother you. I know you don't know me. I'm calling because I don't have anyone else who would understand." Colt set his coffee down. "I'm 79 years old, and I'm in some trouble I can't explain to most people. There's a man after my property. Has been for close to 2 years. I have 46 acres on the west edge of Hadley, Nebraska. My wife passed here 3 winters ago. She's buried on that land. I'm not leaving her." A long pause. Wind on the recording. Or breath. "I served 4 years in the Marines. Did my time in Korea. Came home, built something here. I keep thinking there must be men still who understand what it means to hold a line. I don't know if you're one of them, but Dale said you were the kind of man who might drive a long way for a stranger who deserved it. If this kind of story reaches something deep in you, please take a moment to subscribe and turn on the bell. Stay with this story until the very end." Another pause. Longer this time. "My name is in the county records under Stovall. Hadley, Nebraska. I would be grateful if you called. Or came. Either way." The voicemail ended. Coda had gotten up from the floor without Colt noticing. He was standing close, one shoulder pressed against Colt's knee. Not agitated, just present. Colt looked at the road atlas. He closed it. He had been in Billings for 6 weeks, which was longer than he had been anywhere in about 3 years. Before Billings, there was Missoula, and before that, a stretch of nothing useful, driving through wheat country without a destination. He was 38 years old, and he had been a gunnery sergeant before he was a drifter, and sometimes in the early mornings he could not clearly remember which one had come first. He had good reasons for the movement. They were the kind of reasons that made complete sense at 2 in the morning and less sense in daylight, which is why he preferred the night. He looked at the phone. Then he packed his bag, loaded Coda into the truck, and drove south. Colt stood 6 feet and 2 inches and had the kind of build that looks unremarkable in a coat, but becomes apparent the moment the coat comes off. Wide through the shoulders and solid through the middle, and utterly without waist anywhere. He was 38, with a face that had settled into planes rather than curves, dark eyes set deep under a forehead that creased when he was thinking, which was often. His hair was cut short, still mostly black with gray coming in hard at the temples. There was a scar along his right eyebrow, thin and pale, from something he did not discuss. He kept a close-trimmed beard going gray at the jaw. He wore civilian clothes because he had for 3 years, but he wore them the way a man wears a borrowed shirt, correctly but without full conviction. He had left the Marines after 12 years with a full record and no disciplinary history, and a severance that felt, in retrospect, like a polite way of being told something was over. His wife had left him the year before that. His father had died the year after. He had tried living in Denver for a while, which had not worked. Then the road. Koda was a 7-year-old working-line German shepherd, dense and square through the chest, 82 pounds of muscle and attention running under a black and tan saddle coat that showed gold along the legs and chest and darkened to near black at the muzzle and spine. His ears stood perfectly upright, mobile and independent, tilting forward when something interested him. He had a long, full tail and one distinguishing feature that Colt had noticed on the first day they met, a small split in the cartilage of his left ear, maybe a 1/4 inch, from some early training incident that had left no bitterness at all. Koda wore a plain dark olive collar, no vest, and he rode with his chin on the windowsill for most of the drive through the night, watching the dark plains unroll. Colt crossed into Nebraska at dawn, the sky turning the color of old iron behind him and pale ash ahead. He drove with the window cracked and the heat on, one hand on the wheel, and he thought about the voice on that recording more than he thought about anything else. There was something in it. He recognized the way you recognize a smell from a long time ago. Something specific to men who had held positions when holding them felt necessary rather than chosen. Hadley, Nebraska was small enough that the gas station clerk knew Henry by name without being asked. "You looking for old Henry?" the woman said. She was in her 50s, wide-set and careful-eyed, wearing a vest with the gas station logo over a green flannel shirt. Her name tag said, Ruth Ann. "He's out past the Ridge Road. You'll see the mailbox. It says Stovall and the 2 is rusted off, so it just says Stovall and a blank space. Drive in about a 1/4 mile through the cedars." "Is he all right?" Colt said. Ruth Ann looked at him for a moment with the calibrated attention of someone who had lived in a small town long enough to read a stranger's purpose in their posture. "He's been having trouble," she said more carefully. "From people who want what's his." "You from around here?" "No." "You a friend of his?" "Not yet," Colt said. Something in that answer seemed to satisfy her more than a yes would have. He found the mailbox exactly as described. The gravel drive curved through a stand of cedar that had grown tall and untrimmed, their lower branches brushing the truck's side mirrors. Then the cedars opened and a farmstead appeared in the morning light, modest and solid and old. A white house with a covered porch, a barn gone silver-gray from weather, 2 smaller outbuildings, and a yard of dormant brown grass with a garden bed along the south wall that had been staked and tended and covered for winter. On the far edge of the property, maybe 400 yards out through a field of pale stubble, a low hill rose, and at its crest Colt could see a stone marker. He sat in the truck a long moment. Koda was already upright, ears forward, reading something in the air through the cracked window. The front door opened before Colt got out. Henry was 79 years old and had been a large man once, which was still visible in the width of his shoulders and the size of his hands, but the years had worked on him the way weather works on good lumber, narrowing him and weathering him without removing his soundness. He stood 5 feet 11 inches, slightly stooped now at the shoulders, with a chest that had been barrel-wide and was now simply broad. His hair was white and thin, combed back with water in the old way. His face was the face of a man who had spent decades outside, deeply lined across the forehead and at the corners of his eyes, with the particular stillness that comes from a life of decisions made under pressure. He wore dark work pants and a flannel shirt and a canvas vest, and his boots were old and polished, which Colt noted. He held the porch railing with one hand, not because he needed to, because he was being careful. "You're Decker," the old man said. "Yes, sir." Henry looked at the truck. He looked at Coda, who had his chin on the sill and his eyes steady. "I didn't expect you to come this fast," he said. "I was packed," Colt said. The old man looked at him a long moment with eyes that were pale blue and still very clear. "Come in," he said. "I'll make coffee." The inside of the house was clean and exactly arranged, the arrangement of a man who lived alone and had developed an order that required maintenance to maintain. The walls held photographs, many of them, black and white and color both, spanning decades. A young man in a uniform Colt recognized immediately, squinting into sunlight. The same man older, beside a woman in a garden, wedding photographs, work photographs, a picture of a dog, some older breed, standing at the edge of a field. A handmade wooden cabinet on the far wall held a row of objects, a Marine Corps dress insignia, a photograph in a standing frame, a small carved wooden bird that had been worked with real attention. Henry set coffee on the table without asking how Colt took it. He sat down across from him with the care of a man whose joints had opinions, and he folded his large, weathered hands on the table and looked at his guest. "Dale Merritt, tell you anything about what I'm dealing with?" "Nothing," Colt said. "Just your name and number." Henry nodded slowly. He seemed to be deciding how much to say and in what order. "His name is Gavin Prell," he said. "He represents a land development company called Rimrock Acquisitions out of Omaha. They've been buying up agricultural parcels in this county for about 3 years. Corner lots, road adjacent, anything with access. My 46 acres sits on the only gravel road that links their 2 largest acquisitions. Without an easement across my land, they can't connect them without a mile of new road, which they don't want to pay for. They asked for an easement. They offered to buy the whole parcel, twice. The first time was a fair price, and I declined it. The second time was less, and I declined again. After the second time, things started happening." Coda had gone to the corner of the kitchen and lay down facing the room, which was not something he usually did. He was watching Henry with his chin up, ears mobile. "What kind of things?" Colt said. Henry's jaw tightened slightly. "My property tax assessment was reviewed and revised upward. I looked into it, and the assessor's office had received an anonymous complaint that my land had been misclassified from agricultural to residential, which was false. It took me 4 months to get it corrected. During those 4 months, I received a letter from a law firm in Lincoln saying that if I could not meet my revised tax obligation, they were prepared to assist in a sale. That letter was sent 2 days after the assessment revision, which means someone knew about the revision before I did." "Who was the law firm?" "Ardell and Pine, same firm that handles Rimrock's property work in Nebraska." Colt drank his coffee. He was quiet, watching the old man. 3 months ago," Henry continued, "I received a certified letter informing me of a lien on the property, citing an unpaid balance from a material supplier I used in 2019 to repair the barn. I paid that bill. I have the receipt. The lien was fraudulent. It took my neighbor's daughter, who is an attorney in Lincoln, 6 weeks to get it discharged, and last month, someone cut the fence on my east boundary. I do not run cattle anymore, so there was no immediate harm, but the survey stakes were pulled and replanted 8 feet inside my legal boundary." He said all of this evenly. He had said it before to others, and had learned to keep the anger below the surface where it would not interfere with the facts. "You been to the sheriff?" Colt said. "Sheriff Dara Musselman." "Yes." "She took the report on the fence and the survey stakes. She is doing what she can, which is limited by what she can prove. Pulling survey stakes is a misdemeanor. The fraudulent lien was a civil matter. The tax assessment was a county matter. And Prell himself? Henry was quiet a moment. Prell is 51 years old, and he dresses like he is used to being listened to. He has been here 3 times. The first 2 visits were cordial. He brought papers. He explained things. He is very smooth and very patient, and he has made it very clear, without ever saying so directly, that he intends to have this land, and that the only question is whether I have enough years and enough money left to make it difficult for him. The room was quiet except for the furnace running. My wife is buried on the hill, Henry said. I told him that the first time. He said that was very understandable, and that he respected our attachment to the land. He said it the way a man says something he does not mean, but has learned to say correctly. He looked at Colt. I am not leaving her, he said again. I need someone who understands what that means. Colt looked at the photograph in the standing frame on the cabinet across the room. A woman, 50s or so in the picture, dark-haired, laughing at something off to the left of the frame. The kind of laugh that was not performed. I understand it, Colt said. He stayed. He moved his bag into the small spare room off the back of the house, which was clean and cold, and had a window facing the field and the hill beyond it. Henry had not asked him how long he was planning to stay. He had not asked anything, which was the kind of trust that required earning, and which Colt recognized as the trust of a man who had already used up most of his skepticism on the people who had betrayed it. The first thing Colt did was walk the property line. He went out the afternoon he arrived, Coda at his left side, and he walked the entire perimeter of the 46 acres in the pale November cold. He found the east fence where it had been cut and the survey stakes where they had been moved. He photographed both with his phone and then pulled up the county property records on the Hadley Assessor's website and compared the legal description to the placement of the moved stakes. They had been shifted 11 feet inside the true boundary, not 8. 11 feet along a gravel road frontage was not nothing. He found 2 other things on that walk. The first was a length of fence line on the south side where the wire had been loosened and restapled recently in a way that suggested someone had been through it and replaced it carelessly. The second was a set of tire tracks in the soft soil along the cedar windbreak on the west side, parallel to the property line, recent enough that the mud had not dried. A truck or SUV, sitting, not moving through. Someone had been parked there watching the house. Coda had smelled the tracks before Colt saw them. He had stopped and lowered his nose and then looked north along the windbreak, with his ears stiffened forward, not alarmed, but noting. Colt photographed the tracks and measured the width between them. That evening he sat at Henry's kitchen table with a legal pad and began writing down everything the old man could remember with dates, names, amounts, and documents. Henry went to a cardboard box in the hall closet and brought it to the table, and it was more organized than Colt had expected. The tax notices and lien correspondence and certified letters all in file folders with handwritten tabs. The old man had been building a record. You were expecting someone to look at this, Colt said. I was hoping, Henry said. It took them 4 hours to go through the box. Henry's granddaughter in Lincoln, the attorney named Priscilla, had handled the lien discharge and had a file of her own. Henry called her that evening from the kitchen phone and put her on speaker, and Colt introduced himself and asked her 3 questions, and she answered all 3 with the directness of someone who had been frustrated by the pace of the situation and was grateful to speak to someone taking notes. Her 3rd answer was the most useful. The fraudulent lien had been filed by a materials company called Sand Creek Supply, which did not appear in any Nebraska business registry she could find. It had since dissolved, as far as she could tell, leaving no principals on record. The filing address it had used, the address from which the lien claim had originated, was a suite in an Omaha office building, the same building that housed Ardell and Pine's downtown office. Colt wrote that down and underlined it. After Henry went to bed, Colt sat with a second cup of coffee and thought about Prell. He thought about the kind of patience it took to run a scheme like this, the deliberate pace of it. The multiple tracks all pointed at the same outcome, none of them individually provable as coordination. It was the kind of plan that was designed to exhaust rather than defeat. You did not need to win legally. You only needed the old man to run out of money, or time, or will. That was the bet Prell was making. Colt looked at Coda, who was already asleep on the cold linoleum near the back door. He did not find any depletion of will in this house. What he found was a 79-year-old Marine who had held positions before, under worse conditions, and who had simply run out of people to stand beside him. That was a different problem. He called Dale Merritt the next morning. Dale Merritt was 55 and lived in Kearney and had served 2 tours with the 2nd Marines before he got out and ran a construction business for 30 years. He had called Colt 3 times in the past year when he needed someone he trusted to help with a thing, and Colt had done 2 of those 3, which was the kind of reciprocal loyalty that did not require accounting. "How bad?" Dale said. "Coordinated," Colt said. "Multi-track, fraudulent lien, manipulated tax assessment, boundary harassment, surveillance. The operator is patient, and he has legal cover." "Henry okay?" "He's solid. He's got documentation. What I need is someone who can run property records in Douglas County and flag any connection between Rimrock Acquisitions and a company called Sand Creek Supply. I know a man at the Nebraska Secretary of State's office. Retired. He still has access to the archived filings. That's what I need." "Give me a day," Dale said. In the meantime, Colt drove to Hadley's county seat, a town called Farber, 14 miles east on a 2-lane highway that ran through flat brown fields. He went to the Register of Deeds and asked to review the recorded lien discharge on the Stovall property. And then he asked the clerk behind the counter, a young man in his 20s who seemed surprised anyone came to the register in person anymore, whether a records request had been made on the Stovall parcel in the past 18 months. The clerk checked. 2 requests had been made, both of them submitted by a legal entity rather than an individual. Both cited the firm name Ardell and Pine. They had been pulling title searches, which was standard due diligence practice for a land acquisition, except this acquisition had never been agreed to. "Can I get copies of those requests?" Colt said. "Public record," the clerk said. "Sure." He drove back to Hadley with the copies on the passenger seat. Halfway back, Coda lifted his head from the window and turned to look at the road behind them. Colt checked the rearview mirror. A dark gray SUV, maybe a quarter-mile back. He had seen it when he left the register's office. He had not thought much of it then. He drove the rest of the way to Henry's place and watched the mirror. The SUV did not follow him onto the ridge road. It continued on the highway toward the east edge of town and disappeared. He sat in the truck in Henry's driveway a moment. Then he went inside and called Priscilla again. She answered on the second ring. "I need to ask you about Rimrock's acquisition pattern," he said. "Not just in this county, statewide. Is there public data on their purchases?" "There's a real estate analytics service the firm subscribes to," she said. "I can pull Rimrock's recorded transactions in Nebraska going back 5 years. Give me until tomorrow." "One more thing," Colt said. "Who authorized that fraudulent lien filing? Somebody at Ardell and Pine Signed off on Sand Creek Supply's paperwork. Pause on the line. I've been trying to get that answer for 2 months, she said. The principal on the Sand Creek filing was a listed agent named Orrin Voss. No Nebraska bar registration. The signature doesn't match any attorney of record at Ardell and Pine. But the address does. The address does, she said. That's the knot I can't untangle from here. I need someone inside that office building who can confirm the suite was used by Rimrock or by someone connected to them. Colt looked out the kitchen window at the hill. Give me a few days, he said. Henry came in from outside while Colt was still at the table. He had been walking the property, which he did every day regardless of weather because he always had. He came in and poured his own coffee and sat down. You're making calls, he said. Working some angles, Colt said. Henry turned the coffee mug in his large hands. Prell called this morning, he said. While you were gone. He said he'd heard I had a guest. Colt was still. He said it the friendly way, Henry said. Asked if things were going well. Said he hoped I wasn't being misled by people who didn't understand the situation. He's watching the house, Colt said. Henry nodded once. He had already known this. What did you say to him? Colt said. I told him the situation was clear to me, Henry said. I told him my intentions hadn't changed. He said he understood, and he said he hoped we could settle this amicably before things became more complicated for me. He said the last word with a mild precision that suggested he had committed the phrasing to memory. Amicably, Colt said. That was his word, Henry said. He uses it a lot. Coda came in from the hallway and went to Henry's side without being invited. The old man put his hand on the dog's head absently, the way you do when you've done it enough times that it's become automatic, and Coda leaned slightly into the touch. He had been doing this for 2 days now, drifting into Henry's orbit, pressing close during the evenings when the house was quiet. He had done the same thing 3 years ago with Colt's father, in the month before the end, and Colt had learned to watch for it without knowing exactly what to do with what it told him. He was quiet for a long moment. Is your health okay? He said. Henry looked at him, not surprised by the question, just deciding. My heart is not what it was, he said. I take medication for it. I have an appointment in Farber next week with the cardiologist. You sleep all right? Some nights. Anyone been inside the house recently? Other than me? Henry thought about it. Prell's man came once in September to look at the water damage on the north wall. I let him in because I thought he was offering to help. He walked through the kitchen and the back rooms before I understood why he was here. Which rooms? Kitchen. Back bedroom, the room you're in. He said he was evaluating structural condition. Colt nodded and let it rest there. That evening, while Henry was watching the television in the front room with Coda beside him, Colt went through the back bedroom and the kitchen with methodical care. He was not looking for anything specific because he did not know what had been placed. He moved along the baseboards and checked the window casings and looked behind the cabinet hinges. In the back bedroom, on the inside of the closet door frame, nearly invisible against the white paint, he found a small device roughly the size of a flat button, affixed with adhesive, a wireless audio receiver, consumer grade, available from any number of online retailers. He photographed it and left it in place. Then he sat in the kitchen and thought about that for a long time. The next day he drove to Omaha. He left Henry with Coda, which Henry accepted without comment after looking at the dog once, and then at Colt with an expression that said he understood what was being left and why. He drove the 4 hours to Omaha and went to the office building on Dodge Street that Priscilla had identified. It was a 12-story glass tower with a lobby directory that listed Ardell and Pine on the 9th floor. He rode the elevator to the 9th floor and read the directory in the hallway. Suite 910 was Ardell and Pine. Suite 912 was listed as Meridian Property Holdings, LLC. He took a photograph of the directory. Then he went back to the lobby and sat in a chair near the entrance with a cup of coffee from the building's cafe, and he waited for 40 minutes. At the end of 40 minutes, a man walked through the lobby toward the elevators, mid-50s, tailored overcoat over a charcoal suit, moving with the particular ease of someone accustomed to being given room. Lean-faced, close-cropped silver hair, carrying a thin leather portfolio. He did not look at anyone in the lobby. Colt already had a photograph of Prell from Rimrock's website, now pulled down but cached. The man stepped into the elevator. Colt noted the floor the elevator stopped on. 9th. He called Priscilla from the truck in the parking garage. Meridian Property Holdings, he said. Suite 912 in the Dodge Street Tower. Who's the registered agent? He heard her typing. Meridian Property Holdings, LLC, registered in Nebraska, 2021. Registered agent, Orrin Voss. Same name as the fraudulent lien. Who is the member of record? More typing. The sole member is listed as GPD Ventures, LLC. Let me pull that one. A pause. GPD Ventures. Registered in Delaware, 2019. No Nebraska registration. Delaware doesn't require member disclosure. Can you find a beneficial owner? I can try, she said. But Delaware shells are specifically designed to prevent that. I can run a cross-reference through some of the analytics data. Give me until tomorrow morning. Dale Merritt called that evening with the information from his contact at the Secretary of State. Sand Creek Supply had been incorporated in 2020 using a registered agent firm in Lincoln. The incorporator was listed as a paralegal at Ardell and Pine named Becca Walcott, who had since left the firm and was now working at a county hospital in Grand Island. The business purpose listed was materials wholesale. It had never filed a tax return with the state. It had been dissolved in 2023, 2 months after the fraudulent lien was filed and discharged. That paralegal is a loose thread, Dale said. She might not know what she signed, Colt said. Or she might. Either way, she's documentation. You going to approach her? I'm going to give her name to Priscilla, Colt said. She's an attorney. I'm not. He drove back to Hadley that night, arriving after 10, and found the house dark except for the porch light and the glow from the front room where Henry had fallen asleep in his chair. Coda met him at the door and pressed close, and Colt stood in the dark hallway for a moment with his hand on the dog's shoulder, listening to the house settle. The next morning, Priscilla called before 8. GPD Ventures, she said. I cross-referenced the Delaware EIN against federal property records and came up with a prior Nebraska real estate transaction from 2018. The guarantor on that transaction was a man named Gavin P. Delling. Colt was quiet. Prell, he said. Gavin P. Delling. The P is for Prell, she said. It's his middle name. I found it in a Sarpy County court record from 2015, a property dispute where he was the defendant. He's the beneficial owner of GPD Ventures, which owns Meridian, which used Orrin Voss as a front to file a fraudulent lien through a shell company incorporated by a paralegal at the firm that does his legal work. That's the chain, Priscilla said. I can't yet prove he authorized the lien, but I can document the ownership chain through public records, and the audio device you found gives us something else. He had told her about the device the evening before. Illegal surveillance in a private residence, she said. That's a federal matter. That moves this out of civil court. Have you called the sheriff? Colt said. I'm calling her as soon as we hang up, she said. And there's one more thing. The real estate analytics data on Rimrock's acquisition pattern shows 14 parcels purchased in this county in the past 3 years. In 4 of those cases, the prior owner was served with a tax assessment revision within 3 months of declining Rimrock's first offer. 4 times. The same pattern. Other people have been through this, Colt said. At least 4 others, she said. Maybe more that I haven't found yet. That makes this a pattern, not an incident. He stood at the kitchen window looking at the field and the hill. This was not just Henry. He told Henry at breakfast. Henry listened without speaking, both hands around his coffee mug. When Colt finished, the old man sat for a long moment looking at the table. Others, he said. At least 4, Colt said. Priscilla is documenting them. Henry looked up. Are they still on their land? 2 sold, Colt said. 2 held on. One of the 2 who held is a woman named Doris Prater, about 20 miles east of here. She's 81. She ran into the same assessment revision and the same law firm letter. Henry set his mug down. We need to talk to her, he said. They drove out to see Doris Prater that afternoon, Henry and Colt in the truck and Coda in the back seat. She was a compact, sharp-eyed woman of 81 with white hair cut short and practical, living alone on a 30-acre parcel that had been in her family for 3 generations. She had fought the tax assessment herself, without an attorney, which had cost her a year of her life and more money than the revision itself would have been. And she had won. She opened the door and looked at Henry and said, I heard someone came to help you. And Henry said, This is Colt. He drove a long way. And she stepped back and let them in without further introduction. Her documentation was in a binder with labeled dividers. I've been waiting for someone to connect these cases, she said, at her kitchen table, with coffee and mugs that matched her hands steady. I wrote to the county attorney's office 8 months ago. I never got a letter back. Ruth Ann from the gas station knew Doris. That came up when Colt mentioned her name, because in a place this size, most people knew most others, and the connections ran in every direction. Ruth Ann had been listening to her customers talk about Rimrock's activity for 2 years. She knew 3 other landowners who had been approached, 2 of whom had sold because the pressure had simply become too much. She drove out the following Saturday with her husband and a neighbor named Pete Aldrich, who had 30 years with the County Planning Commission before retirement and knew where every easement, right-of-way, and recorded covenant sat in the county's real estate records going back to the 40s. He arrived at Henry's kitchen table with his own accordion folder. Priscilla drove in from Lincoln the same day. They sat around Henry's kitchen table, 5 people and a dog, and they built a document. Pete's planning knowledge identified the specific road easement that Rimrock needed and documented the existing recorded restrictions that made any eminent domain argument legally complicated. Doris's binder provided a second instance of the assessment manipulation pattern, with dates and correspondence that aligned almost exactly with what had happened to Henry. Ruth Ann named 2 of the 4 sellers, both of whom she had spoken with, one of whom had told her directly that the tax pressure had been the breaking point. Priscilla organized all of it. By evening, she had an evidentiary package documenting a coordinated pattern of fraudulent filings, improper legal pressure, and potentially illegal surveillance against at least 2 landowners with circumstantial connections to 4 others, all traceable through public records to a chain of entities ultimately controlled by Prell. She filed it the following Monday with the Nebraska Attorney General's office and, separately, with the U.S. Attorney's office in Omaha, citing the federal surveillance statute. She also gave the package to a journalist named Marcus Teller at the Lincoln Journal-Star, who covered agricultural and property law and who had been watching Rimrock's acquisition activity in western Nebraska with interest for 18 months. He called her back within the hour. Prell did not come to Hadley again. His attorney sent a letter to Priscilla's office 10 days later stating that Rimrock Acquisitions had no further interest in the Stovall parcel and that all prior offers were withdrawn. The letter was 3 paragraphs and contained no admission of anything, which was exactly what Prell's attorneys had been trained to produce, but the withdrawal was unambiguous. The Nebraska Attorney General's office opened a formal investigation 2 weeks later. Marcus Teller's story ran the following Sunday, with photographs of Henry on his porch and Doris at her kitchen table, and Pete Aldrich pointing at a county map. The headline called it "A Pattern of Coercion Against Rural Landowners." It was specific and documented, and it named Rimrock and it named Ardell and Pine, and it got picked up by 2 wire services. Becca Walcott, the former paralegal, called Priscilla 3 days after the story ran. She had not known what the company would be used for. She had incorporation paperwork. She was willing to cooperate. The audio device from the closet was tested by a technician, Sheriff Musselman, brought in from the state. It was confirmed to be active and recording. The transmission was traced to a receiver that had been registered through a trail of forwarding addresses to Meridian Property Holdings. Gavin Prell's attorneys issued a statement denying his knowledge of the device. The federal investigation did not close. None of that was the thing that stayed with Colt. The thing that stayed with him was a morning about 3 weeks after his arrival. A cold, clear morning in December with frost on the grass and the sky a hard blue. When Henry said he wanted to go to the hill, he said it the way he said most things, without preface, just a declaration of intention, and Colt said he would come along. They walked out through the stubble field side by side, Henry in his canvas vest and work boots, moving steadily if carefully, and Coda ranging ahead and then circling back, his breath coming in small clouds. At the top of the hill was a granite stone, modest and carefully set, with a woman's name on it. Eleanor Stovall, beloved wife and keeper of this ground. Henry stood before it without speaking for several minutes. Colt stood a little apart. Coda came and sat between them both, which he had not been asked to do. "She told me once," Henry said, "that if I sold this place, she'd haunt me." He said it with a quietness that was not quite humor and not quite grief. "Sounds like she knew you," Colt said. 41 years, Henry said. She knew exactly what kind of man was keeping her company. They stood a while longer. The wind came across the top of the hill and moved through the dried grass, with a sound like someone turning pages. "I'm grateful to you," Henry said. "I want you to know that." Colt looked at the stone. "I needed somewhere to go," he said. Henry turned and looked at him with those clear, pale eyes. "You can stay," he said, "if you want. The barn roof needs work. I can't get up there anymore. The south fence needs new posts. There's more than I can do." It was offered the way Henry offered most things, as a simple fact rather than an appeal. Colt stood there with the cold on his face, and the hard blue sky overhead, and the hill at his back and the farmstead below them, and he thought about the road atlas open on the table in Billings, and the months before it, and the years before that, and all the reasons he had given himself for not staying anywhere. The reasons still existed. They were just less persuasive than they had been 3 weeks ago. He looked at Coda, who was watching him with his ears forward and his tail low and still, the way the dog watched him when he was waiting to know which direction they were going. "Yes," Colt said. It was one word, and he said it quietly. And he meant it the way you only mean something after a long time of not being able to. They walked back down the hill together, Henry and Colt and the dog, and by the time they reached the house, the frost had begun to lift from the grass, and the light had changed, and the field was beginning to show the pale gold that comes when cold sunlight finally reaches the ground. Henry went inside to start lunch. Colt stood in the yard a moment with Coda beside him, looking at the barn. The roof had 3 missing shingles on the south pitch that he had noticed the first day. The fence along the east boundary needed posts at 6 points he had already marked in his head. He had not unpacked his bag, exactly. He had just not packed it back up, packed it back. He went around to the truck and got his tools. There are men who arrive in the right place at the right time, and you might think it was luck or accident, or just the random movement of a restless life coming to a stop. Listen. A man does not drive through the night for hours because a number on a phone is unfamiliar. He drives because something in the voice that left the message was something he recognized, a weight that had no name in the ordinary language, but had a name in the language of men who have made promises in hard places. He drives because somewhere past the logic of it, he has already decided, and the road is just the proof. What Colt Decker found in Hadley. Nebraska was what he had not been looking for, which is usually how it works. He found a man who had held his ground long past the point when most people would have left. He found a woman's grave on a hill. He found a community of people who had been afraid and who had become, in the space of a few weeks in a kitchen table, something harder than afraid. He found a roof that needed fixing and a fence that needed posts. He found something to stay for. If you have sat with this story until the end, you understand that some debts cannot be measured in money, and some promises are made before the words are spoken. Henry Stovall left a message for a stranger because he had nowhere else to turn, and the stranger drove through the night because the voice on that message named something that still mattered. You carry that too, maybe. The knowledge that there are people in your life who would drive through the dark if you needed them to, and people who need you to make that drive. Hold on to those people. Be that person when it is asked of you. May God bless you and protect your family, and give you a place to stay that is worth staying in.